Hi, my name is Chelsea Nichols, and I'm an occupational therapist and clinical educator here at Baton Rouge Rehab Hospital. Today I'm going to talk about sensory management and sleep hygiene after brain injury. One of the most common and potentially debilitating side effects of a brain injury is the inability to manage or tolerate excessive or even a normal amount of stimulation. This can lead to behavioral changes like irritability and agitation, headaches, sleep disturbances, and a complete disruption to the healing process that occurs in the days to weeks following the onset of a brain injury. Stimulation or sensory input can come from a variety of sources, both internal and external. Some internal sources would include things like pain, excessive body temperature, mental fatigue, dizziness, or visual changes. The most common culprits for sensory overload or overstimulation, however, come from external sources like loud noises, uncomfortable clothing, sudden or excessive touch, bright or blinking lights, sudden movements, or even just large crowds. As healthcare providers working with patients in this population who are especially susceptible to the negative effects of overstimulation, it's our job to better understand this phenomenon and our role in managing the environment to keep our patients calm and on the path to healing. Central and peripheral nervous systems work together to receive sensory input from the environment, send that information to the brain, process and make decisions about how to respond, and formulate a plan of action directly in response to that stimulus. For example, when you're approaching a red light while driving, your eyes sense the change in the stoplight. They send that raw data to the brain, where you both process the visual input and combine it with your existing knowledge of road safety to cortically understand that the red light means you should stop. The processing part of your brain then uses that information to determine that you need to do something purposefully with your body to stop the car in response to the red light. It sends information to your motor cortex to send a signal through the spinal cord down to the right foot with a specific command to move that foot from the gas to the brake pedal. All of this sensing, processing, decision-making, and actionable response occur in milliseconds before we even know that a decision has been made. Our sensory nervous system is working constantly without us even realizing it, detecting stimulation from thousands of different sources throughout the day. Sensation begins at the source, where peripheral receptors in the body detect specific types of stimulation and relay that information through the neurons to the spinal cord and eventually to the brain. There are thousands of these specialized receptors located throughout the body, specifically designed to differentiate between and relay information to the brain based on the type of stimulation. Chemoreceptors detect chemical stimuli, such as the smell of rotten food or changes in oxygen levels, both inside the body and in the environment. They're also the primary type of receptor in our taste buds, responsible for our unique sense of taste and palates. Photoreceptors are located in the eye and detect light and affect color perception. They are known as the image-forming cells of the body and are the primary receptors responsible for our vision. Mechanoreceptors respond to changes in mechanical force, such as pressure or movement. The mechanoreceptors embedded in the skin are primarily responsible for detecting touch by sensing a change or disruption when anything is pressed against the skin. These receptors are also responsible for our hearing. We have small hairs embedded in our outer and inner ear that will bend in response to sound waves entering the ear canal. This change in position of the hairs turns the mechanical stimulation, or the sound wave, into a chemical signal that travels to the brain and is encoded as an auditory sound. The mechanoreceptors are embedded throughout the body and also detect things such as body positioning and balance, stretch, and changes in internal pressure, such as blood pressure in the vessels. Thermoreceptors are responsible for detecting changes in internal and external temperature. And finally, nociceptors are the pain receptors of the body. They're found everywhere, including embedded in our internal organs. They are responsible for detecting potentially damaging stimuli and sending an unpleasant signal to the brain to produce a pain response. They are the receptors that are considered the gatekeepers of the body, responsible for differentiating between harmless and harmful stimuli. Without going into too much detail of the physiology of the various sensory ascending tracts in the spinal cord, it is important to understand that sensation is relayed to the brain through a variety of different pathways. The posterior column in the spinal cord, composed of the fasciculus gracilis and the fasciculus cuneatus, carry information related to vibration, visceral or organ pain, deep and discriminative touch, or touch that can be distinctly identified, and some information regarding proprioception of the trunk and lower limbs. The posterior and anterior spinocerebellar tracts carry signals from the limbs and trunk up to the cerebellum and relay information related to balance and proprioception and provide feedback necessary to coordinate muscle activity. The spinothalamic tracts carry information related to pain, temperature, pressure, and touch. All of these tracts carry impulses from the peripheral sensory receptors up through the spinal cord to various different destinations in the brain where information is then processed and encoded. Finally, once the information makes its way from the sensory receptors to the spinal cord and up the ascending tracts, it lands in the brain and is processed by various cortices based on the type of information or stimulus presented. The somatosensory cortex is located in the parietal lobes of the brain and is the primary receptive area to detect touch, proprioception, temperature, and pain. The somatosensory cortex has various association areas that correlate with specific parts of the body to allow us to not only detect sensation, but also discriminate where that sensation is coming from in the body. The visual cortex is located in the back of the brain, housed in the occipital lobes. It's responsible for processing all visual information from the photoreceptors in the eyes. The auditory cortices are located on the sides of the brain in the temporal lobes. They are responsible for processing all auditory information from the mechanoreceptors in the ears. In addition to detecting and discriminating sound, the auditory cortex also processes the sensory input to facilitate language comprehension, memory, and emotion association. The primary olfactory cortex, located at the very front of the brain just below the frontal lobe, is the primary cortex involved in processing all information related to smell. It detects information from chemoreceptors on the chemical composition of items. The primary olfactory cortex often works in close association with the gustatory cortex, which is responsible for taste. The gustatory cortex also processes chemical stimuli from the chemoreceptors and can detect taste, sourness, sweetness, saltiness, and the bitterness of food. In addition to processing, encoding, and storing all of the specific sensory input our body receives throughout the day, in a healthy individual, these cortices also work behind the scenes to filter out unnecessary or harmful stimulation to allow us to concentrate, attend to specific activities, and even just tolerate living in a busy, sometimes chaotic world. When a person sustains a head injury and damage to one or more of these cortices or sensory pathways, that filter suddenly breaks down. Think about your central AC at home. The AC unit takes in air from the environment through filters and uses mechanisms within the machine itself to cool that air and blow it back out into the home to cool the internal temperature. When running smoothly, air is constantly being pumped into and out of the system, and the filters placed throughout the home work to collect any dust or otherwise harmful particles that could negatively impact air quality, but also potentially cause damage to the AC unit itself. When the filter gets clogged, air can't get into or out of the machine effectively, resulting in what would be a pretty uncomfortable house. If the filters didn't exist and air could flow freely without the separation of harmful or irritating substances, our air quality would suffer and can make us sick or even cause damage to the structure. Finally, if the AC unit sustains damage, this whole process breaks down and the air stays stagnant, getting warmer, more uncomfortable, and less tolerable by the day. The brain works in a similar way. It has a big job and is responsible for running our entire body during all waking and sleeping hours. It relies heavily on these filters to work behind the scenes to keep the brain from getting overwhelmed by stimulation and causing a backup in the system. When these filters fail, the brain can become overstimulated, resulting in a lack of ability to stabilize itself or organize the unfiltered input, and can lead to things like aggression, difficulty focusing or concentrating, irritability, restlessness, excessive fatigue, and pain. Patients may begin complaining of increased headaches, start keeping their eyes closed or ears plugged, begin disassociating during conversations or treatment sessions or appearing to shut down, or begin demonstrating signs of emotional lability, such as sudden crying or even inappropriate laughter. A constant or frequent state of overstimulation can be incredibly damaging for our patients with existing head injuries, because not only does it negatively interfere with their ability to engage in meaningful or purposeful tasks in that moment, but can also slow down healing or even stop it completely. When working with patients with brain injury and structuring their daily routine, environment, and interventions, It's important to utilize these strategies to help prevent overstimulation from occurring in the first place. Let's break these down one by one. The most important thing we'll all need to do on the head injury unit is everything within our power to control how much stimulation our patients are receiving from their environment, especially for our patients in the Rancho's 4 to 6 levels where overstimulation is the most common. Everyone who interacts with patients, whether clinical or non-clinical, should understand these principles and remember to utilize them when working with or interacting with these patients. The most common source of excessive stimulation comes from the environment itself. Think of all the lights, conversations, tactile sensations, meals, interactions, and self-care tasks that occur within each day. For these patients who have trouble filtering and tolerating all this stimulation, we have to ensure that the environment is set up in a way to promote calm, relaxing rest when possible. Always try to filter out or eliminate blue light when possible. The most common sources of blue light are from television, computer, and phone screens. If patients are using these devices, consider using blue light filtering glasses or only allowing them to watch these screens for limited periods of time throughout the day. Direct fluorescent light is much harsher on the eyes than natural light and can require increased processing demands to filter out the light. When possible, avoid using the overhead lights in the room and instead use natural light from the windows or lamps to illuminate the room when needed. Never turn on a patient's light without warning them first. If the patient is in the gym, dining room, or hallway where the amount of light can't be appropriately controlled, consider using hats or glasses, especially for patients who are showing signs of light sensitivity. To decrease visual stimulation, make sure the room is tidy, uncluttered, and relatively bare. If patients' family members want to bring items from home, ensure that they are comforting items and kept out of direct view of the patient when possible. Always try to limit the amount of signs posted on the patient's walls unless otherwise necessary for patient care. Noise is a major trigger for overstimulation and absolutely should be kept to a minimal amount and volume. When in the room with the patient, keep voices low and at an even tempo and tone. If the TV is on, keep the volume low or on mute. If the patient or visitors have a cell phone, ensure it's set to vibrate to prevent sudden and jarring ringtones. When the patient is in the room, consider keeping the door shut when safe and appropriate, especially during shift change or other busy hours on the unit. It's best to control traffic into and out of the room. If the patient needs linen changes or their room cleaned, save those for a time when the patient is already out in therapy or during a meal time. Keep vitals checks to only what is medically necessary and only check one vital at a time. If one person can perform a variety of tasks, such as checking vitals, emptying trash cans, replacing water, or tidying up the room, try to complete all those tasks in one visit and then allow the patient time to rest. Visitation should be limited or even restricted for some patients. Ensure that any visitors are made aware of these strategies and utilize them during their visitation time. The patient should have no more than 1 to 2 visitors at a time, and ideally, visitation will occur during non-busy hours and last for only a short duration. If the patient begins showing signs of overstimulation during visitation, it should be cut short and the family members made aware of the reason. On the unit, we will need to try to reduce overhead pages, bed and chair alarms, IV alarms, and call light alerts to the minimum possible level. If these are unavoidable, keep them short and respond to them quickly. There's no set amount of stimulation that is too much for patients with head injury. Every person, injured or not, has a different threshold for how much information their brain can process at once. It's important to stay in tune with your patient and pay close attention for the first signs of any of the symptoms we listed earlier. If you know that they're typically even-keeled or even chatty, but suddenly become withdrawn or emotional, that can be a subtle sign to decrease stimulation before the mood and behavior shifts into uncontrolled territory. When you first begin to notice the onset of symptoms, immediately adjust the environment to reduce stimulation to assist your patient. That may mean turning off the lights, removing them from a physical situation, turning off the TV, or simply stepping away from them for a short time. It's better to stay ahead of overstimulation than to try and manage it once it has already occurred. Finally, trust what your patient is saying. Even if you feel like the environment is calm or non-stimulating, or you're providing appropriate cues, if they are reporting or displaying any of the symptoms we've discussed, you should immediately suspect overstimulation. Even a normal or underwhelming amount of information can be too much for some people. Keep in mind that they may have been in a controlled environment for the entire day, but if their therapy was challenging or they didn't get great sleep, hypersensitivity can build. While it's important for us to manage stimulation and do everything we can to keep our hospital a controlled environment, we must also appreciate that when our patients discharge from our care, they often go into very uncontrolled, overwhelming situations. Part of the treatment plan has to include slowly building tolerance for stimulation so that transition is less jarring. Make sure to add on new stimuli at a low amplitude and slowly so the patient has time to habituate and adjust without getting overstimulated. It's okay if the patient feels challenged, but make sure they don't feel overwhelmed. One way we can introduce this strategy is through the use of sensory diets. This might seem like a pretty strange concept, but it's not unfamiliar to occupational therapists and is a widely accepted therapeutic technique to manage behavior in children with sensory processing disorders and adults with neurological injuries. As part of an evaluation, an OT can help identify triggers or antecedent behaviors for overstimulation and work with the patient, the care team, and the patient support system to develop a routine of the structured introduction of stimuli in a supported, controlled manner. This can involve the use of therapeutic massage, weighted modalities, introduction to various textures, temperature modulation, deep breathing, and exercise. Sensory diets, when used correctly, allow for the patient and their family to feel a sense of control over their situation while still providing beneficial input throughout the day to prepare the patient for any potential discharge environment. Another buzzword that's familiar to OTs is the term therapeutic use of self. We learn in school that the way we interact with patients and clients can set the stage and sometimes make the difference between success and failure for our patients. The way that you introduce yourself and communicate with your patient can make them feel safe, accepted, and supported, or it can potentially make them feel threatened, overwhelmed, and disengaged. Historically, studies have shown that survivors of brain injury are particularly influenced by first impressions and can quickly make a judgment about someone's intentions and attitude in the first 10 seconds of meeting them. Scientists aren't 100% sure why, but the general belief is that patients can lose certain nuanced social skills after a brain injury that might make someone more likely to overlook nonverbal communication or give someone the benefit of the doubt if they think you're having a bad day. So some of these patients rely concretely on what is presented to them and build assumptions based on that initial interaction. Building a good rapport with your patient will be critical in ensuring that your interactions do not become overwhelming for the patient. You also want to pay close attention to your volume and body language with these patients. Frequent use of the arms and hands in speech can add to the incoming stimulation for the patient, which can distract away from your message. Sudden changes in volume or the cadence of your speech can also lead to an overwhelming amount of input, which some patients may struggle to process. Always be honest, direct, and even-keeled with your patient, and try not to let the outside world walk into the room with you. And remember, if a patient lashes out as a response to their injury or their lack of control, don't take it personally, and certainly don't match their elevated tone. Finally, poor sleep quality can be both a consequence of and contributing factor to frequent overstimulation. Many survivors of head injury report disruptive sleep and fatigue as the most debilitating consequence of their injury. We're going to talk more about nighttime sleep in a second, but we also need to consider that patients with neurological injuries are more prone to fatigue and need varying amounts of rest to manage the cognitive demands of both therapy and daily routines. According to the Brain Injury Association of America, as many as 98% of all people living with an acquired brain injury have some degree and form of daily fatigue. There can be many contributing factors to this jarring statistic, but it's hypothesized that it's mainly caused by the fact that the brain has to work overtime to compensate for the cognitive deficits sustained in a brain injury, damage or changes to the brain structures responsible for arousal and alertness, or hormonal imbalances resulting from damaged areas like the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and pineal gland, which regulate the sleep-wake cycle. We can use a few different strategies to try to manage this debilitating symptom and enable our patients to participate in the intensity of inpatient rehab. We sometimes consider daytime rest in a negative connotation because the goal of rehab is to get patients out of bed during the day and in the bed at night. However, patients who are more prone to decreased activity tolerance and fatigue, daytime rest can not only be a necessity, but therapeutic as well. In order for patients to be as engaged as possible in their beneficial therapies, they need to be well rested. Energy conservation is a pretty straightforward principle based on the 3 Ps: plan, prioritize, and prepare. We can help our patients with executive functioning deficits work through the organization skills required to incorporate these strategies into their daily lives. Keeping a weekly planner is a great way for patients to learn to plan out their days while paying attention to what energy expensive tasks they may have to do, such as doctor's appointments, housework, or therapy. We need to ensure that our patients are getting food with plenty of energy boosting properties, such as fruits and veggies, lean proteins, and whole grains, to not only help with energy levels, but also promote overall brain function. It seems counterintuitive, but we need to try to avoid caffeine and sugar with these patients, as they can contribute to overstimulation and ultimately worsen fatigue. Mental rest breaks and minimizing stress for our patients can also play a huge role in their overall level of energy or fatigue. If we set the demands too high by giving patients excessive work outside of therapy, challenge them too intensely during therapy, provide too many overwhelming cues, or let their cortisol levels rise out of control, we might see a sharp and sudden increase in signs of overstimulation, including withdrawal and disassociation. We need to allow our patients time to shut their brain off from thinking and decision-making to allow it to recharge throughout the day. Some patients may end up needing the assistance of stimulating medications to help manage fatigue if it is especially debilitating or impeding on functional participation and quality of life. These decisions should always be driven by a physician and considered as a last resort if more conservative measures fail. Sleep is an integral part of daily functioning and is as essential to survival and well-being as food and water. During sleep, your brain is able to recharge and maintain the health of the various pathways that keep it functioning smoothly and efficiently. When sleep is disrupted or we don't get enough hours, our brain can struggle to do basic things like concentrate, form memories, and respond to stimuli. The brain's involvement in sleep is complex and multifactorial. Sleep is partially regulated by the hypothalamus, which is the control center for sleep and arousal. A nucleus located inside the hypothalamus helps to regulate our circadian rhythm, so we know when to fall asleep and for how long to stay asleep. Once we're asleep, the brainstem is involved in regulating the REM cycle, allowing us to enter into the deep sleep required to encode memories and recharge. During that REM sleep, the thalamus kicks in to produce images, sounds, and sensations that form our dreams. Finally, the pineal gland in the brain produces the hormone melatonin, which is essential for helping us settle down and initially fall into sleep in a relaxed, dark environment. Unfortunately, due to how interconnected normal brain functioning is with a good sleep routine, patients with damage to a wide variety of areas of the brain can suffer from debilitating sleep disruption. Damage to the previously mentioned brain structures can create problems with falling asleep at appropriate times, staying asleep for an adequate amount of time, achieving a deep enough sleep to encode memories and learning, or even be able to fully arouse from sleep. This in turn leads to symptoms of poor sleep, such as irritability, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, and memory deficits. The lack of REM sleep can also impair the necessary healing that occurs once the brain is in a state of relaxation, resulting in a prolonged or even disrupted recovery from the initial injury. This leads to worsening symptoms or a decline in function that can massively affect a patient's quality of life. Finding ways to encourage and promote better sleep in our patients with brain injury can not only help with short-term symptoms, but also with overall healing. Sleep hygiene is the practice of developing habits and routines to normalize sleep and promote the best possible amount and quality. It can and should be utilized in healthy individuals, but especially in patients with brain injury who are suffering from poor sleep quality. At Baton Rouge Rehab, we will set several goals that will not only govern sleep quality while our patients are in our care, but hopefully easily carry over for them at discharge to minimize disruptions to their sleep schedules. First, consistency is key. The goal is to try to fall asleep within the same 30-minute time frame each night and wake within the same hour time frame each morning. This should be true regardless of time of scheduled therapy, meds, or meals. It'll be important to enforce this, especially with younger patients who may be more inclined to stay up late and sleep in. We'll need to make sure visitors are aware of the patient's scheduled bedtime and in their visitation at least 1 hour before that time. Make sure to let your patients know that this bedtime isn't a punishment, but instead a vital part of their recovery. Keeping a consistent daytime routine can be just as critical as at night. During rehab, our patients will have the benefit of relative consistency due to the nature of our services, but we need to use this time as a teaching opportunity for our patients and their caregivers to plan for a consistent routine after discharge. While therapeutic rest during the day will be critical for some patients, that does not necessarily mean that they need to be in bed napping. Therapeutic rest can be as simple as sitting in a comfortable chair with low lights and minimal stimulation. For patients who do require naps during the day, we need to try to keep in-bed time limited to those naps only and prevent naps lasting longer than 20 to 30 minutes during the day. The sleep environment will need to be as dark and quiet as possible. Some patients may benefit from a sound machine or soothing music to assist in falling asleep. Keep the blinds drawn and fluorescent lights to an absolute minimum 30 minutes prior to bedtime. Make sure that the room and bed is as comfortable as possible and that the room is a safe, soothing environment for the patient. As therapists, we need to try to avoid associating the bed with pain or exercise, so limit bedside therapy to the chair or a portable mat when possible. Obviously, we want to keep noise to a minimum for our patients during this time, so keep conversations low and behind closed doors. All alarms and overhead pages should be turned off or minimized at night. If early morning vitals are absolutely not necessary to the patient's safety and recovery, try to save them for after wake time. Turn off all electronics at least 1 hour before bedtime. This includes televisions, cell phones, and laptops. We can encourage our patients to listen to music or even engage in minimally stimulating conversation during that time. Patients should avoid eating within 2 hours prior to bedtime and should avoid caffeine and excessive amounts of sugar throughout the day. Finally, any medications that have a stimulating effect should be scheduled for as early in the day as possible. Ideally, most medications will be given morning to midday to prevent interactions that can disturb sleep at night. At times, patients may need the use of medication or supplements to assist with sleep, but again, these should be driven by a physician and considered as a last resort if conservative measures fail due to their likelihood to cause dependence. One of the most important roles we will have as a hospital serving these patients and as individuals working with them on a daily basis is to be informed of what brain injury is and how it can negatively affect our patients in every aspect. Hopefully, today you learned something about two very debilitating side effects of brain injury, overstimulation and sleep disturbances, and you feel equipped to utilize the strategies listed here to create an environment that promotes overall wellness and healing. As always, if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to any of our brain injury unit champions or your unit manager. Baton Rouge Rehab Hospital is proud to be a leader in inpatient and outpatient rehabilitation services in Baton Rouge and surrounding areas. We pride ourselves on a commitment to restoring lives through compassion and a dedication to excellence. As the frontline staff members at Baton Rouge Rehab, we achieve these goals and standards through a responsibility to attain the highest level of competence and consideration for the unique and specific needs of our patients. Participating in hospital-wide education and seeking out opportunities to learn and grow as an individual is what can set you apart as a top talent contributor to the hospital. The education provided to you today highlights the 4 values of Baton Rouge Rehab: compassion, integrity, teamwork, and excellence. When you take the knowledge you have gained and apply it to person-centered, excellent care, you are contributing to the excellence of Baton Rouge Rehab. Thank you for your dedication.